Okay, I'm Dennis Dunbar. I like to say I had the Photoshop magic to movie posters and images for ad campaigns. I love working on cool images with cool creatives and sharing my tips and experience from 30 plus years of using Photoshop with other people so they can help learn and grow and improve their skills. Oh, I guess I'm just supposed to continue on because I see Casey's.
Also, you should tell them how you work with some really big clients. I mean, I was super impressed.
Oh yeah, well let me share my screen. Share. Let me share my screen, and rather than show you Zoom, I'm going to switch over here to my web browser. This is my website, dunbardigital.com. And in here you can contact me and find out a little bit more about me. You can there's a link to a blog. I have two different blogs. This one was more about highlighting different projects and things. But then I also, for the last couple of years or so, I've been doing a Substack blog. And it's just dennisdunbar.substack.com to subscribe to my blog. But you can see here I've got, let's see, over about 2 years, 2.5 years or so, a little over 2 years, I've been writing articles for this. So just trying to share different ideas. The latest one was, let me see if I can view post. The latest one was on frequency separation. And this was basically just to give a guide about how you set up the layers and things like that, and how you start to work with it. Not getting too deep into it. The next one I'm going to write is about using the mixer brush in this workflow, so you know how to work with things. But it's really important, I thought, for people to know the nuts and bolts about how to set up frequency separation layers and how to work with them, because it's a really powerful technique. So it's one I use a lot for things. It's a deep dive. Won't have time to go into it here, but maybe a future event we could talk about frequency separation and go on about that. But that's what my latest article is about. Also, I have a in-person workshop coming up. Nina Batista and I. Nino is a photographer and a retoucher based in Houston, Texas. And he shoots a lot of glamour shots of women and men and all that. And he has different tools and things that he's got available for retouching and color grading and things like that. We're doing an in-person workshop October 5th, so a week from Saturday, here in Los Angeles. It's going to be really exciting, talking about the art and business of commercial retouching. We're also doing a series of short webinars. We did one just on Monday about frequency separation. And our plan is like once a month or so to do a very short, like 20, 30-minute targeted webinar talking about a particular technique or a particular idea or so, just to give you kind of short and sweet bites of some information we have to share. So that's a little bit about my background. Also, I will copy and paste this link into the chat. Let me find the chat for Zoom. Wait, it's not letting me see the chat at the same time I'm sharing a screen. So what I'm going to have to do is Casey at the end of the event ask me to remind me to paste the link for this, because this is a series of, this is 6 or 7 different PDFs I have written up. I wrote some of these a while ago, but explains things like an idea about 10 channels expanded, explained. Basically, the idea with this one is every image actually has 10 channels. It has red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow, black, and the LAB channels. And if we have time to get into today, I'll show you how one of those channels inevitably is going to have some information that helps you make a mask or helps you do something cool. So that's what this one is about. When you're compositing, you're using blending modes a fair amount. So I have 2 different articles explaining, going a little bit more into blending modes. This one here talks about setting up your preferences in Photoshop, just some standard ideas for this, how to set that up so you can work easily with it. There's one on sharpening techniques, one on color correction technique I call divide and conquer. That is also, I think, on my Substack blog now. If I have it right, come back here to my posts. There should be somewhere here. Should have the well, I guess I don't have divide and conquer in here yet. Bring in the light. Okay. Oh, here we are. This one right here. This post here is the divide and conquer thing. So you can get to that one. And it's a technique for color correction. We'll talk a little bit about that today because you have to do color correction when you're compositing. But that just gives you a little bit background of the kind of stuff I do, the work I do. I started doing this work in 1991. The summer of 1990, I got really kind of swept up in like, what is this coming thing? I want to learn about it. I really need to know. So that was what got me started and had me working on trying to figure out ways to do this. And ever since then, I've been working as a high-end retoucher and been lucky to make some good connections. I got started working on movie poster things. If I come back over here to my website, you should be able to see here some of the movie poster work I've done. These were a lot of fun to work on, but I got started working on movie poster stuff for working with Roger Corman. When I was first starting out, there was a photographer I knew named J.P. Morgan, and he would shoot people in elaborate sets with lots of flying pieces and things. So the early retouching stuff I learned how to do was retouching out the wires and the fishing line and things like that, holding up the pieces. And one of JP's clients was Roger Corman, the king of B-grade movies like Little Shop of Horrors, Death Race 2000, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, all those kinds of things. And Roger wanted to go from the old-fashioned cut and paste and airbrushing way of making a movie poster to like, hey, I hear you can do this on computers. And JP said, Dennis is your guy. So for about 10 years, I did all the retouching on Roger Corman's movie posters and on his VHS covers, and then their DVD covers and Blu-ray covers and all that kind of stuff. I did all that. And I met art directors who went on to work at other ad agencies and things like that. So that was what got me into working on movie poster stuff. And it's been a lot of fun, working on these things. The role I play in working on a movie poster comes in at the end of the process. It's a very long process where the studios go to maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different ad agencies, say, here's our movie. We've got Jumanji coming up. We're doing a reboot on Jumanji, and we need some ideas for posters. So the art directors start off with sketches, and then they start mocking things up. These days, they might start off with something, using AI prompting to get an idea. These are just mood board ideas, like, oh, how about we have The Rock on a motorcycle riding through the jungle or something, or we have Jack Black in a cave or something like that. So they may start off with like that. And it slowly goes through version after version after version with the studio asking for them to refine it, revise it, and go over that. Sometimes it's gone through like 100 different versions for a poster. So this might be, they might call this one like, oh, this is comp 132. And so when they finally get to that, it's approved, go. Then that rough layered comp gets sent to somebody like me to turn it into finished art. And that's why they call it finishing. So I come in at the very end, I take the low res comp and scale it up to whatever the final size is, add the extra around there they call the bleed, so that it will fill out the canvas. And when they're printing it or using it for different things, they've got that. I have to build all that stuff out. And then I have to replace all the low res elements with high res elements, and then go in and do all the retouching and the cleanup and stuff like that. So sometimes it gets kind of complicated. Like this one for Jack Black, his shot was actually a set shot. He's running behind he's behind a bush. So there's some bush coming up over here. He didn't have any legs. We basically painted these legs in just so it would kind of come out and fill out the shadows for that. Since it was a set shot, he was really kind of blurry, and his face really didn't have any detail for this. So I looked through these special shoot shots they had, and I found like, oh, here's one where his face is in almost the same kind of angle. I could get the detail from his beard from that and add that detail in here. I could get this lens for his glasses from another one, and that one from his glasses from another one, and build in the detail and make that work. So sometimes it gets to be really a lot of work for that. And then other times it's like this shot here. This was basically pretty simple. It was one shot of her, needed a lot of retouching, needed to get the color and get this all to blur out right. But it was a fairly simple one. This one was also fairly simple. Strip him out and put him against the background, do the color grading and make it work. I think Sylvester Stallone here was a head strip. So you get the idea. Every project is a very different kind of project. And so that's really what got me into doing the heavy duty compositing and retouching. You can see I also do a lot of different kind of work. This is stuff I've done for Paramount Plus. They've been a big client of mine. This was some pharmaceutical ads. This was for the rollout of the 787, Boeing 787 jetliner. So these are a lot of compositing with these, but also it's just regular advertising work. There's product work, beauty and product stuff as well. So lots of different stuff that I've been working on. But today we want to get into talking about Photoshop. So I'm going to switch over to Photoshop, not to my mail. You don't need to see my mail. And the idea we're supposed to talk today about is masking and compositing. So first thing I'm going to show you is a couple of ideas about masking for this. And over the years, the workflow keeps getting refined and keeps changing and all that. But today, even today, my go-to way of first making a mask is to use the pen tool. And over here, let's see, you should be able to see. Yes, that is turned on too big, so you should be able to see this. I'm just going to change my workspace. I had to jam on some deadline stuff today, so hope you don't mind that I have to reorganize my workflow, my workspace here a little bit, so it's set up better for this. There we go. Change these things so you have a little bit better way of seeing what's going on for this. Anyway, so I have the object selection tool here. That's why this keeps going on. It keeps trying to like, okay, what object do you want to choose? And a lot of these tools have become really powerful. But my bottom line thing, my thing that I usually start off with is I use the pen tool to go around that. One of the PDFs I have, I think is here's one on the pen tool from that Katrine Eisman wrote. So this one here you'll be able to download. Oh, don't upgrade this. You'll be able to download this, and she talks about the pen tool, different ways of doing that. That again is a deep dive for it. But for Photoshop, I find the pen tool to be a really, really accurate way to start off a mask. And it gives me sort of a Zen moment. I'm going around tracing around this for that. But I'm not going to get into that a whole lot because, again, we only have like an hour and a half here. So I could spend a day teaching you about the pen tool. But I'm just going to show you this technique I had for modifying the mask and for cleaning things up. So I'm going to make a copy of this layer. And here I have a white background, and I have our pinup thing. And here's the outline for this. So a really basic thing to do is to load this as a selection. If I deselect this, I click on here, and if I hold down the command key, it will load it as selection. But if I click on here and I have it selected, I can also come here to say make selection. And when I do this make selection, it's going to give me a choice here for a feather radius for that. It's going to be how far out it softens the edge of the mask or whatever. Do I want it to be razor sharp? That would be no pixels. Do I want it to be really soft? Since it's in pixels, it might depend on the resolution of the image. But usually I go around 0.5 to 1 pixel or so. And I have lots of ways of adjusting that. I'm going to show you the ways of adjusting that. But that's basically just what I'm doing to turn this into a selection here. So we're going to click OK. And now we've got this as an active selection. Come back over here, and you can see here we don't have a layer mask or anything. So I need to turn the selection into a layer mask. So the way to do that is to come down here and click on this little icon here. It says layer mask. If you have an active selection, it will turn that active selection into a layer mask. Another option is to come up here to layer, come here to layer mask, and here's reveal all, hide all, reveal selection, hide selection. So this gets a little more complicated, but again, it's the same basic idea. With Photoshop, you've got like 3 or 4 different ways to get to the same place. Doesn't matter which one you use. What matters is you find one that works for you and you get used to it. So we're going to say reveal selection, and that's going to give us a black layer mask where black is everything that's hidden. I'm going to get off of that object selection tool. Black is everything that's hidden and white is everything that's showing. So here we got, great, we have her masked out. Well, let's zoom in and see how accurate that works. Like, oh, wait a minute, over here, I got some of that blue background. You see we got the blue background here. I got some of that blue background coming up around here. I've got some edge over here. Over here, I've got some color here. I'm gonna have to fix that. Again, I got a little bit of the edge showing up around here. So I have to do some cleanup. My layer mask, my pen path wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good. But again, you see the blue outline around here. We've got some stuff going on in the hair. Hair is a whole other story for this. You can see I just kind of got close to the hair, but there's lots of errors in my mask. So the thing I want to show you first is an easy way to clean up these errors in the mask. Now, the thing we could do is we could go to the brush tool. I choose the brush tool. I'm going to choose black as my foreground color. I'm going to make sure I have this set for 100% flow, 100% opacity. I don't have anything funny set up on there. And I could do this. I could come here and try to brush really carefully. But if I'm going to throw in a contrasting color behind her. Come on. There we go. Here's a contrasting color behind her so we can see really easily what's going on with the mask. And you can see where I was painting like, oh my goodness, I made a mistake here. I came in too much with this. When it was just against the white, it was a little hard to tell because we had this white against here. So I often throw in a contrasting color for here. And basically all I do is just, I go to layer, new fill layer, solid color, color fill, and then I choose a color from here. Let's make this one purple. We say okay, and now you see we need to bring this up here. There you can see we have our alternate color against here. So you might try a couple different ones. The nice thing with doing it with the color fill layer is you just double click on here. It brings you right back to the dialog where you can pick a new color, and you can make it gray, you can make it lighter, you can make it darker. You get all these choices with that. So that's one reason why I like to use a color fill layer. It also is very lightweight in terms of what you're asking Photoshop to do. So you're not really losing a whole lot for that way. But I'm going to throw this out because we made a mistake with the pen tool. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to come back over here to my channel. I'm going to command click on it to make my choice. And I'm going to click on that, add my layer mask. And now here, see with the purple, we don't see all those contrasting colors so much. So sometimes it's really good to have a couple of different ones to look at. So let's come back here to white where we see this. And now let's see. Using the brush tool would work, but it's going to be really painstaking and I have to be really careful. I want to have an easy way to go, something that's really simple and easy to approach. Well, one thing you can do is you can blur and burn and dodge on your mask layer, and that's going to make it easier for you to work with this stuff, and you can be really sloppy and finesse with that. And what I mean is, if we zoom way in, you can see here we've got a few pixels of grayness. That was the feather that we chose when we loaded the selection for this. And we chose a 1 pixel feather, but when you zoom way in, you can see it actually is, you know, like a pixel out this way, a pixel out that way. So it's a little bit softer than you think it's going to be for that. For this shot, it's not too bad. We're zoomed in at what, almost 4,000%. So of course it's going to look really soft. But I want you to see very clearly with that. But the feather, the softness of the edge is what the gray areas are. And then the black is going to hide it. The white's going to reveal it. So if I come over here and I say, okay, this is already pretty hard, but I want to soften a little bit, I can come over here to my blur tool. I can choose blur tool. I have to make sure sample all layers is turned off for that. So I'm just working on this one layer here. I can set a strength. I find something around 40, 50, 60, 70%. It's all working off of by eyeball. So if you think the strength is too strong, you can dial it down. If you think you're not getting a fast enough result, you can dial it up. So I'm going to come over here and introduce some more gray into this. And you see, this is what we've done. We've added gray into that by using the blur tool on it. Okay, that brings the whites out, the gray out. I want to subtract from this. So what would be the way I subtract from it? I come over here to the burn tool. And the burn tool, I set this for shadows. I set my dodge tool. If I'm going to do that, I set my dodge tool to highlights. I'm going to come back over to here. I will again adjust the exposure, usually somewhere around 50%, but I might dial it up, might dial it down, depending on how fast I'm going and how kind of results I get. Again, it's all by eyeball, all by observation. But I come here and I use the burn tool, and look at this. I am getting rid of these edges around here, cleaning that up. It's also getting a little bit harder. It's getting a little bit crisper. The edge of your mask should match the sharpness of the edges in your image. So like the edges around her neck to her hair, the edges around her strap to her body there. So we don't want this edge looking like it was cut out with a knife edge for that. So then I'm going to come back over here to the blur tool, and I'm going to just lightly stroke over here and just soften this up a little bit. And sometimes it's soften. Go to the burn tool, soften, burn tool, and you kind of go back and forth with that. You don't want to creep in too much because we start losing a lot of her arm here. So you do want to be watchful for that, not creep in too much for that. But sometimes you just kind of, work the edge for this. Again, it's all by eyeball. I have set this up so that if you look here, O is my dodge tool and burn tool, and R is my blur tool or my smudge tool. So if I hit R, suppose I'm on the brush tool and then I just tap R on my keyboard, it goes to the blur tool. If I hit O, it comes to the burn tool. If I hit Shift O, it switches back and forth between the burn and the dodge tool. So I can switch to the dodge tool and come back here where we lost some and bring that edge right back out. Switch back to the blur tool, soften it up a little bit. Come to the burn tool because I got some of that blue coming back over here. Now a little corner like this, right here where we get that little bit of blue, that's where I'm going to switch back to the paintbrush. I'm just going to touch in that little area there and go that. But that allows me to zoom around the edge of the mask here really pretty quickly and do a really quick cleanup. And that is what I wound up with on this copy. This copy of the image going all the way around here. I went from this to this, cleaning up those edges, getting rid of that extra stuff there so that it had a much cleaner looking image against there. Now, of course, since we're also talking about compositing, if we're putting her against white, we're not really it's not gonna really be believable. We need to have a shadow, right? So this is where, come on, this is where, click on the right thing. This is where I added in the shadow. I'm gonna show you how we did that right now. going to come back here to our original image here. And if I come here to the channels, one of the things that happens a lot, especially if you have a plain looking background, like this is basically just seamless, it's going to make it a lot easier to kind of pull out a channel for this. So I'm going to look at the different channels. I'm going to look for a channel that will give me a good starting place for pulling out the actual photographic shadow from the image. I'm going to look at the red. That looks kind of interesting, but there's a lot of gray around here, separating out the background from the shadow is going to be a little challenging for this. Green is okay. It's a little thin in the shadow, but we could boost that up some for that. Blue looks like it's got a little bit more to it here. And it kind of makes sense here because we've got a teal kind of looking background. So green and blue are going to probably have the most there for it. So I'm going to make a copy of the blue channel. I'm going to pull this down and I'm going to drag it to the plus channel. I'm going to pull it down, drag it to the plus channel. And this is called channel pulling because we pulled the channel down here. And now I've got this copy of it. So I can play around with the copy and I can manipulate it without affecting the color or anything in the image because I'm just working on a copy of my image. I'm going to bring up the curves tool, but I could also come here to image, adjustment, curves. You see Command M is the shortcut for the curves tool. And here's going to be applied directly on the layer. So I want to click on the white point tool. I'm going to click up here and make sure I'm looking at my histogram, make sure the background values are set for white. I'm going to beef up the shadow just a little bit. I don't want to beef it up too much. I'm going to beef up that shadow just a little bit like this. And we'll say, okay, this looks like it might be pretty good as a shadow. Something we can start off working with. I'm going to hit OK and apply that. Hit OK and apply that. Now, since I can do a lot of things with this, but I want to turn this into a selection for this. So to turn it into a selection, the easiest thing to do is to invert this because white's going to be selected and black's not going to be selected. So I'm going to have to either load the selection and invert the selection, or I can just invert it here. So Command I inverts this. Now, again, I showed you that we can command click on the path. We can command click on the channel here, or we can come over here to select and say load selection. And then we choose what we want it to do. Load blue selection, blue copy to. I usually go by the load selection, command click path, but either one works. We come back over here to our layers. Turn the layer on and we turn our mask girl on. We're going to click on here so we're seeing this. Now I'm going to make a layer below here. I'm going to call it demo shadow because I already have one called shadow. And now I can fill my background. I'm getting a beep, 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 and I don't know why I'm getting a beep, beep, beep. I want my background color to be black. There we go. And then I'm going to fill the selection with black. So I have the black shadow here. So I'm going to come over here to edit fill, fill with foreground color. I could also have chosen black here. And then say good, drop the selection. And there we go. We have that, which is how I achieved this. It's that same thing, only what I did was I added a layer mask here. I added a layer mask to it and then brushed it out everywhere except where I really wanted it to be. So it's a good start for a shadow. You might want to impart a little bit of a color to this. A lot of ways we could do that. If you want to put a little hint of a color to it, maybe just a little hint of that teal. Let's turn this off and select that teal as the color. So we've got that loaded as our foreground color. So now what I'm going to do is turn this back on. And I could add the color to it a lot of ways. Since I already talked about doing color fill, I'm going to drag this color fill layer up to here. And I'm going to turn this on. And I want that to only affect this layer. So the way to get that to only affect this layer is to make it a clipping group. I'm going to show you in a moment what a clipping group is, but I'm going to make this a clipping group for here. So I can come here and say layer, create clipping mask, and it steps in here on the layer palette and it has a little bent arrow here. So it bends in and shows that this layer here is now controlling where this layer is visible. Wherever this layer is visible, wherever this layer mask is working, this layer will be visible. But if you get the idea here, if I turn this layer, if I turn this layer off, everything's off. So it's one mask and one layer controlling several others. I wanted this to be a little bit of that teal color. So I'm going to double click on here and sample that teal color. And now we got that, but I only wanted a little hint of it. Easy way to get just a little hint of it. Turn the opacity down. And we give it just a little hint of that color. For that shadow should have a little hint of color. Since she was photographed against that teal kind of color, I think maybe that looks really pretty good. It just takes the neutrality, the grayness out of it. So it starts to look good. And we can set this for color if we want. So it's not affecting the density for it. But I'm gonna just go with set it for normal and let that be. If I want to make this darker, I can double click here. Since this is clicked on the HSB, it's clicked on the B, I can just turn this down and darken that shadow up a little bit. A lot of ways I can do this for that. But that's a really quick, easy way of adjusting a mask and then bringing in a shadow for this. I do use this idea of a captured shadow quite a lot with product stuff. So if you're a photographer and you're shooting something where you're going to want to strip it out and put it against another background and you want to capture the beautiful photographic shadow you've shot, there's a great thing. Just make sure you use it on a plain background. White works really well for this, hint, hint. But if you're shooting on it, just make sure it's not a really dark color and that it doesn't have a super strong color cast to it, that you not got a lot of dirt and stuff like that for it. So if it's a nice clean background, this makes an easy way to do that. Are there any questions about what we've talked about so far? I'm not hearing anything, so I'm going to continue on. I want to show you another thing that might be really applicable for you here. And this is on, again, on masking and then a little bit on compositing. So the idea here was this photographer was hired to shoot a corporate headshots for a place, for a company, and he had a selection of like blurry backgrounds he took in their office. He intentionally blurred them out so that it wouldn't be distracting. But when he was shooting them, if you've ever shot corporate headshots, what they do is they give you a room in the office. It's a cramped, tight little room. You set up your background. They come in one after another. You go click, 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 click. And so didn't have time to set up in 4 or 5 different different locations in the office, get the lighting set up right, move it around, make sure there's nobody in the background, make sure it's the right time of day for it. They didn't have any of that room for it. So he just had a library for this, but he needed this stuff composited against here. So when I did this, it was quite a while ago, and I did a recorded video. I called it the green screen double step. And if you look on my YouTube channel for that, and remind me to post a link to my YouTube channel. Here, I don't do very many videos, but I've got a couple up there. But I did this thing about where you use the color range selection to select the green screen, and then you had to do another one where you refined around her hair. But nowadays we've got a better tool, a faster tool for this. And sometimes if we cross our fingers, it works out really well. And you see at the bottom of my screen here, you guys can see where it says select subject, remove background. I'm going to click on select subject and let it take a moment here to think. When I am doing select subject, if I deselect, I'm going to deselect this. I can also come over here and do select subject. I think I have to set this in the preferences for the select subject, where it says you can do it in the cloud or online. In the cloud, it's a little more accurate for it, so I always like to do it in the cloud for it. But anyway, I've got the selection active around here. You can see the crawling ants. So I'm going to click on here and turn this into a layer mask. And look at this. It's not bad to go from that to that. in just an instant step. We want to come in and look here like, okay, this is where we need to zoom in and do some quick look around here. We can see that we've got some problems with the mask here. We've got a little bit of an edge showing here. The hair really kind of needs some finessing. We've missed something here. Quite often when I use select subject, there are chunks missing. For this, I'm going to show you another image here where we use select subject and it doesn't give a good result. So one thing you always want to do is look at your layer mask after you make it itself. So you can look at the layer mask by holding down your option key and click on the layer mask. And that shows me this. So let's zoom in and look around here. If you guys see, can you see where there's some grayness happening in here? This isn't really kind of clean. It should be more of a clean white. Around here, we got a little bit of bumpiness to it. Her outfit has a little bit of that bumpiness to it. Like, okay, so we're looking at the right bumpiness for it. So that's a little bit hard, a little bit harsh edge on there. We got a little chunk taken out here. What's happening with that chunk? It's a little chunk there. So okay, we've got that looking at. So overall, this actually did really a pretty good job. We just need to kind of clean up the hair and then clean up that gray. So we know what we can do about cleaning up the gray. We've got the burn and dodge and blur tool for this, but we want to also clean the hair up a little bit. So that is where, if I come over here to my properties panel, that's what I want. I want to click on the layer mask. I'm going to come over here to my properties panel, and you see here there's a thing called select and mask. I can also get to that over here from select and mask. It's going to give me a chance to bring up a new dialog that allows me to play around with the mask. And that's something that is a really, really useful tool for this. So I'm going to open up select and mask. And I have to move you guys over to the side here so you can see this. But we've got these sliders here. We've got edge detection, smart radius, global refinements, shift edge. We also over here have these different tools for this. So this one allows me to paint a selection. This one here is a refine tool. This one allows me to paint a selection. This one refines the edge. And then this one here is plus or minus for that. So I'm going to use this. And I typically would use this to go around the edge of the hair. But let's see what happens if we try a quick tool for this. So the quick tool for this would be the edge detection. I'm going to click on smart radius, and then smart radius is supposed to tell the difference between what has detail you want to reach out here for and what is really clean detail that you want to keep the edge of that for. It doesn't work that well over here, and I'll show you why, but then we have a trick for how we combine these things, and that's what the double step thing was. So it's not the green screen double step, it's the select subject double step, but we're going to get there. We're going to get there. So what this is if I pull this out, it starts to reach out and look at like, oh, look, if I reach out here, there's pixels out here that has values similar to here. So I'm going to slide this out, and it starts to capture, starts to do a better job of capturing the hair and give me a little bit more natural looking edge here. It's not always perfect. Around here is going to need some handwork for that, but it's much better than what we started off with. For that, if I click here to show original, you see the difference between what we're getting. It's looking like a much more natural kind of result here. I can come back in here, click on this tool here, the refine edge brush tool, and I can paint here and say, give this area here a little more thought. And let's take a moment. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. Maybe give this area here a little more thought. That's looking a little bit better. But we can come in here and finesse that with that to never, no end at all. We just keep going on with that. Believe me, I can get lost making a perfect mask here for a few hours. And when you're trying to be really effective with work, you have to be really thoughtful about how much time you're spending. Is it gaining you something worth the value, the time you're putting into it or not. Now, the other thing is if you remember, originally she had a green screen behind her. That green screen is going to probably put in some color cast into her hair. So there's a really cool tool here, output settings. It's called decontaminate colors. And what decontaminate colors does is it pushes this color out into the image a little bit for that. So you get rid of some of that fringing color for that. Now, if we set up to 100%, you see that hair starts to look like just solid kind of pixels of hair. It's not very effective looking. If I turn this down though, and I put it to like maybe 38%, let's call it that, that does a little bit better job for that. Now, when this comes up, I'm always going to want to choose new layer with layer mask. So when I'm doing this, or when I'm doing this, the edge selection with high, I always do a new layer with layer mask. It's going to give me 2 layers with 2 different layer masks. The original one we started out with and the one we have now. So that way, if something I did here like messes up the areas that were looking good, I can combine the 2. And I'll show you how to combine the 2 more easily here. But we're just going to output this to a new layer with a layer mask. And now here we've got our 2 layers. We have our original, and we have this one where the mask is looking better, and we've got the color looking better. But I want to show you, this is what, if I turn the layer mask off, this is what the decontaminate colors does. It brings that color out here. Part of the thing it did though is it thought the edge of her shoulder should be this hair brown. So this is one of the areas where it kind of contaminates into parts you don't want it to do. And that's one reason why I always output it to a copy, because now we've got something that we can work with here. So a couple of things we can do. We like the hair for this. Let's see what it did here. We picked up more gray areas in here though. Look at this. This is where that smart detection is supposed to work, and it doesn't really work that well here. We get lots of weird gray and stuff happening here, whereas our original layer mask, this one, looked much cleaner here. So I want to combine these two. I want to combine these 2 masks here for this. So what's an easy way to do this? The way I'm going to do this is going to make use of the history tool. And it's going to, so I'm going to come over here to my histories tool. I'm going to click on here. I'm not going to click on here yet, come to think of it. I'm going to have to do some setting up for this. So most of what I like is on this one, is on this model one. And the hair thing I want to have is from this one. Here, I want to have this layer. I want to have this one for the hair, but I want to have this one for the rest of the body. So I'm going to make, and this one here, I also don't want that. So I'm going to make a copy of this layer here, turn off our original one. And I'm going to think to myself, what is easier to do? Is it easier to restore the hair, or is it easier to restore the body? This is probably easier to restore the hair for this. But in this case, since I've already made the copy for this one, doesn't have the color contamination on her shoulder, I'm going to do it the other way around. I'm going to copy this layer mask here. I'm going to replace that layer mask, turn off this top one. So now we've got that, but we've got a contaminated layer mask here. I'm going to come back over to here, and my history palette, I'm going to just click the little brush icon here for your layer order. I want to make sure my history state that I have clicked on here is add a layer mask here for that. Now I'm going to come over to here to my layer mask. When I look here, I come over to my history brush, which is this tool right here. The shortcut is Y. And I'm going to restore that history. And I can come around here really quickly, combining those 2 masks. This is the double step. This is part of it. Maybe that would be a triple step. But we come here and do that. And now we have the nice hair mask, but we have a little bit of the contamination of the hair. We want to get that cut in here. So now I can turn this layer back on, and I'm going to make this a clipping group here. So I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to throw this out. I'm going to delete that because I've already combined those two copies here. Now I'm going to, I just want this to show up on the hair area because I don't want that. So I'm going to add a layer mask for it, invert my layer mask. And now I come over here to the brush tool, set white for my foreground color. And now I'm painting in around the edge of her hair, combining those things here. So it's kind of a lot to digest here. But what I did was I used select subject to make the original mask for her, which is pretty good. Then we use refine edge to get the better mask on her hair. And then I combine the one where I decontaminated one. So I get rid of the color contamination in her hair, but I also don't mess up the edge of her jacket. So it's kind of a way of making these kind of things work for this, combining different tools and things like that for making masks for that. Do we have any questions on that? Are you guys all following this pretty closely? I can't see the chat, so I don't know if there are questions in the chat.
I don't have any questions in the chat. If you want to drop questions in while Dennis is talking, you can, and I'll bravely interrupt him, or you can probably interrupt him yourself. I think he seems like he'd be cool with that.
I'm very happy with the idea of people asking questions. In fact, I want you to ask questions. Otherwise, I never know if I'm just like, yeah, I've lost you. You guys are like, how much longer till the raffle? So I want to make sure you guys are getting what you need.
We can do the raffle in like 10 minutes, and then anyone who was like hanging on for the raffle, I don't want to stress them out, and then they can just watch the rest of the presentation. So we can, or we'll do it at the next stopping point, like the next thing you're going to do, the next good stopping point. I'll just give some people some more time in case they want to enter the raffle.
Okay. So since we're talking about masking and compositing, I want to touch a little bit on masking. I want to touch a little bit on compositing. So and we're already almost an hour into this. So I want to get into a little bit about compositing for that, because it's going to use some more of the masking techniques and some other techniques and stuff with the compositing as well. Is that okay for you guys?
Sure.
I'm going to take that as a yes.
Sounds good.
Okay, so here's a job a photographer sent to me. It's a product shot, and what he originally sent to me was a couple of different layers here. He shot this one where like, okay, this is the cone I want, but this is the ice cream I want. You can see he's got that in there. So like, I need those combined for this, and also I want he shot against this red background. So the idea was like, okay, and can you also give me a nice clean background for this? So he shot this background, or this was his photographic background that he had, and he wanted these things composited against that. So that was a pretty easy job for that. So the end result was this. So let's turn these things off. Whoop. I'm going to come up here, and first thing I had to do was position everything so that everything would fit properly together. And then I'm going to make a copy of this layer, throw out the layer mask. I'm going to delete that. So here you go. So we need to make a layer mask for this. So the first thing I did was look at this like, okay, I love these little bumps and stuff. It makes it look organic and really cool. Doing the pen tool around here, I could kind of fake them, but it's just kind of like, why do I need to do this? Such a simple shot or whatever. So I could use select subject, but there's this other tool, which is really kind of cool. It's object selection. So I come over here and I make sure I'm clicked on this layer, and you see that this wants to kind of guess at what the objects are. And so it sort of highlights that and gives you a magenta looking outline around there. I don't think there's a way to change the color on this. I'd have to check. Oh yeah, right here. So you can set the outline. You have you can change the color of the outline. You can set the outline thickness or whatever for that. So if you use this tool a lot, but I just thought, okay, let's see what happens if I use select object selection tool. Now that looks pretty good, but if I'm just looking at crawling ants, it's hard to tell. So I'm going to come down here and click on this for a layer mask and like zoom in and look like, wow. I'm going to get off of that tool so I can come in and look like that's actually really pretty good. It's a little too harsh and crisp for this, for really close up look for it, but it's not a bad start. And in this particular one, I'm looking carefully at it. I'm going to look at there. I'm going to put the ice cream on top, so I don't mind that this area here is a little rough. I'm looking here. I'm not seeing shades of gray where we shouldn't have gray. I'm not seeing, holes in our mask. Like, okay, it's not bad, but I want to make that look just a little bit smoother. So this is where we come to our selected mask. We'll make sure we're clicked on the mask icon for this. It's really difficult to tell, and I do wish Adobe would give us a chance. I would love neon green to be appearing around here for this, because there have been so many times I'm clicked on the wrong layer. Like, why is it not doing oh, I had the layer selected, not the layer mask selected. So make sure you click on the layer mask. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to click on select and mask. Now we did select a mask for refining the edge, for finding the hair for the woman. In this case, we're not going to do that. I'm going to turn off, I'm going to close that part. What we're just going to do is we're going to add a little hint of a feather. And then we're going to bring the feather in. We're going to bring our mask in a little bit. And then we are going to, let's see. Yeah, I want just a little hint of feather. So I'm just showing you what the feather will do for this. And then there's a smoothing option, which will help me get rid of a little bit of that bump. If I shift this in and bring it in and I've got too much of a feather, I can also bring up contrast to kind of crispen it up here. So it's a balancing act of smoothing it. If you got lots of little bumps here and it's a little too rough, you might want to turn your smoothing up a little bit. I usually don't have to worry about that, but in this case, I'm going to give it just a little hint of it, because I think that's a little more pleasing. It looks organic, doesn't look like I made it too crunchy looking. And then just a little hint of a feather. This is going to depend on the resolution of your image, because this is in pixels. So I always try to make sure that it's really kind of small for that. And then the shift edge, it just brings it in so you're not getting some of that background bleeding into your image. Now, in this case, I'm just going to output this to the layer mask, because I don't need a new copy with a new layer mask. So I'm going to set this output to layer mask. And we went from this to this. So here it looks a little kind of artificial, but here it looks a little more natural. So that's a quick way of making the mask work, and we did our check for it. We have our ice cream cone. Again, I'm going to make a copy of our ice cream cone here. I'm going to throw out that layer mask. And I'm just double checking what layer should be there. Okay. These two should be clipped to this. There we go. Okay, so now I want to just select the green ice cream for this. And how am I going to select the green ice cream? Well, I'm going to come back here to Object Selection Tool. Make sure I'm clicked on the layer. Give it a moment to think. And it wants to select everything in here. So maybe Object Selection Tool is not going to work for me. Let's come over here. Let's see what Select Subject does. Select Subject selects everything here. So we want to refine this down a little bit. So we're going to deselect that. Instead of select object, let's come over here to Quick Selection Tool. And Quick Selection Tool here, if you make your brush bigger, I'm holding down the Control and Option key on my Mac, and that makes the brush bigger, smaller. And if I come up and down, it makes it harder, softer. In this case, I just want it to be a little bit bigger because that sets here is setting a ratio for selecting this. And let's just keep selecting. The idea is here, I'm looking for something, looks like this is giving me pretty good selection around here. I'm looking at my crawling ants. And you can see, it looks like we've got a pretty good selection around here now. Okay, so let's see what that does. Hey, look. Look, it didn't do such a bad job. We got our ice cream cone, and we've got our ice cream here. We zoom in and look, okay, we need to do the refine edge for it. We want to bring it in a little bit because we see we're getting some outline here, and we want to smooth it out a little bit, maybe soften it up just a touch. Again, the sharpness of the edge should match the sharpness of the edges inside the image here. So it's getting a little, the depth of field as it gets outward, because this part of the ice cream is obviously closer to the camera than this part of the ice cream was. So the short depth of field for that means this edge should be a little bit softer. So we're going to come right back here to select a mask. We're going to add just a little hint of smooth, a little hint of feather. We're going to shift the edge in. And again, we can eyeball the results for this. And if we think we're softening up a little bit, we hit OK. And voila, we have combined ice cream, cone, and background. So that was a really pretty simple way of doing this. And then since the ice cream itself was a little bit too bright, I also added some curves adjustment layers to this one. Was brightening it up a little bit. This one is set for color blending, and this is adding a little bit more green into it. So we're just kind of making that a little more green looking. And then we have overall curves. The overall curves, just adding some contrast, darkening the shadows a little bit to just make it look a little beefier. And then the final touch for this was the photographer had shot it with this kind of background. I thought, okay, this looks pretty good. But something about the color between the green and the red, like I get Christmas colors of green and red, but this wasn't a Christmas shot. So I started to think, what can we do about color harmony for this? So this is another thing, and we can do another event where we talk about color grading and color harmonies. But that's what got me thinking about this one for this. So what kind of move can I make on this to get the color to work a little bit better? And one of the things that I found really effective is to think in terms of color harmonies. And what I mean by that is the relationship between the colors on a hue wheel. There are different color harmonies, but one of the more common ones is called a complementary. So the colors should be pretty close to being opposite each other. The primary colors in your image should be pretty much being opposite of each other on the color wheel here. So I thought, what is the opposite color of the screen? Because I love that pistachio green ice cream. We don't want to shift this, make it blue ice cream or something like that, because I don't think that's what photographers are after. So if we're going to shift the background, what color would be the opposite of this green? So I'm going to come over here to the eyedropper tool. I'm going to come over here to the eyedropper tool. And then I'm going to bring up my color palette. And I have set my color palette to the color wheel. You can set that here by clicking on these three little lines here. I set it to color wheel for this because this gives me a hue, a saturation, and a brightness slider. It also gives me a visual look here for this. So if I click here on the screen, we're looking at this like, okay, what's the opposite of here? Like, ooh, a magenta. A magenta kind of color is the opposite of here. So I want to push this more towards purple magentas than this kind of a red that it is. It's kind of a desaturated red, but it's kind of a red like this. If I click over here, you see The red's right in this area. And I want our thing to be more in this kind of area here. So I want to push some blue into the red to make the background to get a little more of a purpley kind of background here. So that was what gave me the idea to do this. And this is a curve adjustment layer where I've desaturated down a little bit, but I've pulled some green out and I've pushed some blue into it to get this color over here more closely over to here. And if I've click on my eyedropper tool, you can see we got this. So like it's almost opposite here. And then this luminosity curves layer, this is set for luminosity, but it's not making any difference. So we don't even need that on. But this one set for color blending is giving me this ability. And you see the difference just thinking about how the color goes. It really makes that color pop. So when I did this retouching for the photographer, I said, here you go. Here's the shot. You know, this is round one for the shot, but here's an alternative idea. Here's what I call one alternate or alternate one. And he goes, wow, I love that. Let's go with that one. And then he told me that when he shows in his portfolio reviews, the art buyers at the ad agencies all like, oh my God, I love the color on this. The contrast is just so good for that. So just a subtle little move, thinking about the color harmony really raised the impact on that.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said you didn't know why they chose the red, right? Or why? So I guess my question was, why did they have the red originally there?
I wasn't at the shoot when they shot it.
Okay.
This photographer, he's a good friend of mine, and he's his philosophy. He's a commercial photographer. He has a big studio in the Helms Bakery complex. A week from Saturday, I'm doing an in-person workshop with Nina Batista on commercial retouching, and we're my friend Anthony Nex is hosting it. He's lending us his studio space. So he's got this great studio, and his philosophy is, if I'm not actively shooting for a client and I'm not actively renting out the studio that day, I'm shooting stuff for my portfolio. So he's always working really hard about this. So he'll say, like, here's 5 portfolio shots. Get to them when you can. You know, if you can have them for me in a couple of weeks, that'd be great. Here's another 5 portfolio shots. Please get them to me when you can. So it was that kind of a process for it. So I don't know why they chose that particular color combination.
Gotcha. Yeah, because the change that you made is like a million times better for sure. Definitely looks great.
It's one thing as a retoucher, I always have to think my job is to help bring about the vision of my client. So I'm trying to understand the vision my client has and go with their lead and give them what they're looking for in terms of that look or whatever. So if I'm making a choice like this, I will give them their choice and like, here's another idea. What do you think? And some of the clients, like some clients are like, no, I love, I really enjoy the color grading. I like doing that aspect myself. So no, thanks for the idea, but I like what I had. I'm like, great, fantastic. Go with your colors. Other times they go, wow, that little movie you made really made a big difference. So it's something I will sometimes provide as an alternate, but I never go like, here's what you got. I decided to change this radically, and I don't care what you think. I would never ever do that. So it's basically I have to try to think of what could I add to the process that they might like.
Makes sense. I do have some questions and some comments. I'll start from the beginning. So, Summer said, following along just fine. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Jason said, this is amazing. Would love more about compositing for the movie posters if you could. Summer also said, yes, hearing about the movie posters was interesting. I like learning about the product shots too. I'm kind of paraphrasing you guys, you can tell that. Jason said, do you charge the client for the portfolio images for your time?
Yes, and yes. When I'm working with a client on a portfolio image, most of the time I'm able to give a discounted rate on that for it. So it'll depend on how much work's going to be involved and all that. But offer a discounted rate, but the thing with the discounted rate is it's going to be, I get to it when I can get to it, because I can't always put aside something where there's a hot deadline job for a client that I've got to put aside for your discounted rate. So that's the deal with portfolio reviews or the portfolio images. If a photographer is like, here's a product job I need to deliver to my client in 3 days, can you do it? We get that done. But here's one for the portfolio for a portfolio piece. Can you give me a break on the price? Like, okay, but if I get to it in the next couple of weeks, that's going to be the turnaround. Like, okay, great, we're happy with that. And so I work on that kind of a basis for it. I also found working on portfolio images with new clients, new photographer clients, it's sort of a great way of building up that relationship where I understand their vision and the way they think better, and there's not the deadline of the client's expecting this in 6 hours, and we're still trying to get the color right. What's going on? And they're getting stressed. Nobody wants that. So so it's a nice way to work on and building a relationship with a new photographer is doing the portfolio work that way. I do have a few movie poster things to show, just to give you an idea about how movie posters are built for this. I'm going to open up a couple of these for you and show you a couple of these. Some of these a little bit older. Movie poster clients are very reluctant to let me show the layered files and all that, especially if something's being recorded. So I have to be careful. So these poster things are things from a few years ago, but you'll get the idea of how all this stuff is put together. This one was for an entertainment client. And it's built in the same way as a movie poster thing, but it's not strictly a movie poster. I'm going to close down this color, slide this off to the side, slide a few things here. So this one here is something put together, Emmy's Heroes. When Netflix was doing a lot of Marvel Comics shows, they had Luke Cage, they had something about Avengers, they had Jessica Jones, they had Daredevil. I forgot what this guy's character was. So they had these different things going on. So the photographers was assigned a job of recreating that old photo of the ironworkers having lunch on the girder for that, over in New York City. And so like, hey, we had this idea, and can you help us out with it? So what they did was they photographed parts of a iron beam. They took this iron beam and moved it across the room, photographing it in different ways. And so let me turn off some of these layers here for this, so you see how this is put together. First, we start off with finding a background we had for it. Actually, we start off with this, like, okay, this is where the gatefold is going to be for the magazine ad. So we had an idea of what to aim for and don't put anything important in there. This was a stock shot. I made this a smart object, so it's non-destructive for this. So I can double click on here and it opens up, and here's the original photograph we start off with. So it's great to know that the original is always embedded in there. We haven't lost any quality. And it also means that if I add a Gaussian blur to it, we can then decide to change Gaussian blur. So that's a nice aspect about that. When I had done that, we realized these buildings were popping up behind them in a certain way. So we want to get rid of the building for that, so it looked a little more natural. And they wanted it to be faded out at the bottom, so it was a little bit darker, but also not so contrasty, a little bit really kind of knocked backwards, so it didn't demand too much attention. Then we add in the beam. This beam here, the mask was made with a pen tool for this. A little bit of cleanup on here. You can see my retouch layer is clipped to here, and that this is a smart object. So you can see this is all the thing they had for the prop beam, and they just shot it in their office. like this. So nothing fancy about how that was shot. Cancel, yes, cancel that. And then we had another piece, another part of it where that was brought in here. And of course, the lighting was a little bit different, so I had to work on it. The top and the bottom had to be moved a little bit so that they would match up because the perspective wasn't perfect. So this is all built layer by layer going here. It's kind of like, okay, I've got this in place. If I zoom in, I've got this worked in place. The back line is straight. The bottom line is straight. So we've got this going in a nice straight line here, but this part here is off a little bit. What am I going to do? How am I going to get that? Like, oh, I know. I'll bring in a copy of it and I'll use a layer mask for it. So now we've just got the two different parts here. So this thing is just for this edge. This right top is just for this edge here. And I'm not using it for that back edge there. And it's just a copy of this and the retouch, just sliding it across there for that. And then, of course, I had to lighten it up a little bit and do some corrections so it looked like the light was shifting on it. So we go across here. You can see this is the same pattern there, but we're gonna have somebody sitting on it, so it's not gonna make that big of a difference there. And then we had a little bit of color correction for this. You'll notice that I use color curves and luminosity curves a lot. And if we have a moment, after I show you a few things, I'll show you that color correction technique. This is the divide and conquer color correction technique. I said there was that article on, but I'll show it to you live in just a moment. Then each of these heroes are built in. And for the heroes, let's come down here. We've got Charlie Cox. And Charlie Cox is this smart object. He's sitting here. He's interacting with the producer for the job, just sitting on a like a desk or some sort of a thing from IKEA or something like that with a white background here. So they're just getting a position. He's sitting on something that gives kind of like a line like the beam would have for that. And in working on this, we just made a layer mask for him. The layer mask was made using the different techniques I showed you. I made a pen path around them, and then I used the refine edge around here. Sometimes to really get the hair perfect, you have to go in and brush in hair and things like that, but that's a whole other thing for it. Some retouching work was burning and dodging. So adding a little bit of, enhancing the light a little bit with the burn, doing a little bit of dodging to kind of help them look a little better that way. But it's all set up in layers because I'm not the decision maker. So if the guy says, what are you doing? I don't like that shadows on him. Like there, I can just turn that off, or I can cut the opacity on it down. In fact, the opacity on this is set to multiply, and it's only at 40%. It's a hue saturation layer. So saturation's turned down and set for multiply. So that's just kind of darkening there. But it's just a basic technique, beauty retouching technique. Thin is brought in the same way. Trying to move this around. So you can see here, Charlie Cox has his layer, and then down here are shadows. So this is a layer mask for the beam that was just made by the beam. I made a selection from this. I merged all this into a selection and made a selection for that. That became a group layer mask for this. And then Charlie has a cast shadow, which is painted, and a contact shadow, which is painted. So making the shadows two different ways made it easy to have a hard and a soft shadow, and a core shadow, which is darker, and the cast shadow, which is softer. So it's just really easy to go in and paint that in. But obviously this shadow wouldn't be hanging out down here, so that's why I used a layer mask for it. It also meant I didn't have to worry about it coming up over here either. And it's below his layer, so it's not going to come over and contaminate him. So each layer is built the same kind of way. Oh, we had two different versions of him. One where he was eating a sandwich, but the client didn't like the idea of him eating the sandwich. So then we wound up going with this one for that. But I left the original layer in there just in case we wanted to do a version for ourselves where he's eating the sandwich for that. So that was what that was all about there. Um, so he's built that way. She's added in the same way. You can see she's got her shadow layers, her layer mask, smart object. This edging is this edging layer is just some paint around the edges of her hair to kind of build up the density of her hair. Because if we looked at just her, the white background was kind of feathering that out a little bit too much, so it was a little hard to see just her hair for that. So I wanted to give a little more density to her hair for that. So that's what the edging layer was. The retouch layer is for her. So any retouching or cleanup on her for this. When you're doing stuff for movie stars, sometimes it's a lot of retouching. The client is the decider for that. So quite often the star has, if they're a big star, they have approval on their poster for that. So if it's a big star, if it's a big woman star, I'd have no idea why they did such heavy retouching on my face there. I didn't approve it. They're not telling you the truth. They always have approval on those things.
Okay,
So
I was actually just going to ask you that, like, how many of these stars need to approve this? So just the big ones, right?
yeah, it's usually just the big ones. I'm not the one determining that. What'll happen is the typically the production manager for the entertainment ad agency reaches out to me like, "Hey, we have a project for you to finish." So they'll send me the files. They'll say, "Can we have this by 2 days from now, whatever?" So you work. Sometimes it's many hours, 20 hours of work, whatever. So you're working as fast as you can to meet their deadline. And they go, "Okay." Their internal art directors or creative directors will have rounds of comments about it, like, "Okay, can you, we need a little more lighting on him. Can you do a little more dodging and burning? The shadow, I'm not happy with the shadow. Oh, we forgot to tell you his shirt should be red, not this gray." Whatever it is, they come up with those notes. You address their notes, and then when they're done, like, okay, now it goes to our client, and it goes to the studio, and then the studio might be quick. They might take a couple days. Sometimes it's a week before they get back to you. But it goes through all the studio's internal thing, and that's where they run it by the the talent, the stars, and their internal department. Make sure they're all happy with it. They might come back with notes, and we have to address the notes. So there might be several rounds of this. I've had movie posters turned around in like 3 or 4 days, and I've had some where it goes on like 5 or 6 weeks, and you're kind of like, like it's been 3 days. I haven't heard anything. Like, hey, send an email to the production manager, like, hey, any notes? Like, yeah, we're waiting. We'll prompt them again. So you never know when you're gonna get that. Hopefully, it's not coming at like 8 o'clock on a Friday night. Oh yeah, we need this first thing Monday morning. In which case, you wind up working over the weekend on it. So you
Right.
hope, you
So
hope they're fast.
I have a couple questions for you. One relates to this. Jason asked, how many rounds do you do on average for the posters?
Um, for the posters, I don't set the rounds of that. So sometimes it's really quick. Uh, Sometimes you're on like round 8, round 9 uh, for that. And when I'm working on stuff for the movie posters, almost always the agency is like, here's the file, track your hours. They know, they have pretty good idea of how long it takes and what the cost to be for the finishing stage. If I'm working with a photographer, and like on a job like this one, the photographer hired me, and they had, it wasn't going through the normal movie poster route for that. You're like, okay, let's come out. We're hired to shoot this job. Let's set a budget for the retouching. We take a wild guess at what it is. The client understands it's a wild guess. The photographer understands it's a wild guess. So we try to guess on the safe side. So I'm like, okay, they're going to be 7 people composite on here. You figure so many, an hour, 2 hour, whatever it is per person. I got to build this. I got to bring that in. Like, so you come up with a, like, okay, like, let's say 15 hours for this. And like, okay, we got approval on that. That's a good budget. And then when I'm going that way, I will always tell the photographer in the written estimate, whatever number we come up with, that includes 2 rounds of revisions from the client. The reason for that is, particularly with like a product shot or something where you're working on a pharmaceutical thing, the client will, if they think the rounds of revisions are free, they will have you do 10, 20 rounds of revisions if their heart desires, and if they think the deadline will allow it. So you need to give your client, my client, the photographer, I'm giving him a tool to go and tell the ad agency, like, we've done round 2. I've checked with the retoucher. We'll do round 3 for you. That'll be included, but anything after that's going to be extra. And then the studio, the ad agency, the end client will go, oh, wait, we're going to make sure we consolidate our feedback so we don't burn through these too much. Or, okay, fine, we're, track the hours, and then we're all getting paid extra for it. We don't mind the extra work. But you need to have a tool you can use to push back on that. And with movie poster stuff, it's just track your hours. And if the studio has you working 20 extra hours, great, you're getting a big payday. If you get it done really fast, cool. But we're not worried about doing estimates up front so much anymore. But
So
but
that
anything with a
sounds
photographer, a commercial job, tend to be estimate driven.
okay. So that sounds, so Jason had another question. Do you normally charge per hour or project, then bill the hours worked? So it sounds like you kind of make a estimate of all the hours for the initial work in the 2 rounds, and then you charge hourly for the rest of it, right? Am I
Uh,
getting that right?
yeah, it's always gonna be sort of a flexible uh, approach. I try to have as flexible approach as possible, because if I'm too rigid, it's going to cut out potential client stuff. So if it's with a photographer, and like, if Anthony was shot, for that ice cream cone, I mean, we did, like, okay, I've got this ice cream company, or the cone company wants me to shoot an ice cream cone for them. You know, um, here's what the budget they have is. Can you do the work for that? Or what do you think it's going to take? Okay, we'll get that estimate to them, see if they push back on the numbers, see if we got some room for it. And you go through that negotiation process. So if I'm working with a photographer, usually goes through a process like that. If I'm working with the entertainment studio for a movie poster, it's almost always these days just track your hours, and keep track of how much time you spend on it for that. And you try to be quick. You definitely can't nurse it along, because you've got a lot of peers who are competitors. So you try to be right in the pocket of what is reasonable for that. So you're not like, this poster should have been 10 hours and got it done in 2. You're not going to like charge them 2 hours for it, but you're also not going to like, this should have been 10. I'm going to charge them 20, because the next job will go like, you know what? Your friend Dan will do it for half that rate. And you try not to get caught into that, because there's a lot of work out there for the movie poster stuff, and we should all support each other and not try to compete each other by undercutting prices or whatever like that. So we try to, be reasonable with it, but fairly accurate with how much time we take and how quick we can be.
Yeah, that's a great point about not undercutting the worth of what you're doing for everyone involved. It's a good point. I do have another question from Summer. It's kind of a broad question about where to look for jobs. So you might want to answer it at the end, but I don't want to forget to ask you. So
Okay.
Summer used to work in the film industry as a 2D and 3D visual effects compositor, has been out of the industry for a while. Would like to know if there's like good platforms for finding work.
Um, yeah, that can be a whole discussion.
I figured.
Let's show, let me show one more movie poster. Actually, I want to quickly show 2 more movie poster things, so you guys get an idea about what goes into that, and then we can take those jobs where I can stop the screen sharing, and I can see the people's face, and we can talk about that. But yeah, I'd be
Sure.
happy to share information about that a
That
lot.
sounds good. And just for everyone, so they know, when I'm done with all this and I post the video later, I will post all the links that I share in the chat, which I will be sharing some more links for Dennis and the group also. And don't worry, Sarah and Jerry, you are the only two people who have entered the raffle, and we will be doing the raffle as soon as Dennis is at a good stopping point.
Okay, wow. Somebody's going to get a free year subscription. That's not bad. That's not bad. So okay, so continuing on here, just adding in one of the things, if you're doing a complex composite, you almost always want to have your color grading layers sit on top of all your compositing layers and your retouching layers. The reason for that is it gives you a chance to change gears and change looks if you decide that, without having to go back and redo work. If we did the color grading on these people before we got into doing the compositing and then seeing what the final look would be, then we'd go like, you know what? I made this guy too green and all the retouching's there. I want to go back and redo that color grading. Well, now I have to redo all the retouching on him, and I don't want to do that. So now I'm going to have to color correct on top of the color correction, and I'm going to be chasing my thing because I made him too green. Now I have to take the green out. And so it's a lot easier just to go in and do that color grading on top. So one of the things I did here was I just added a little bit of vibrance in here, and vibrance is a great tool that adds saturation for that. But the difference between vibrance and hue saturation is vibrance saturates the desaturated colors, and saturation will saturate all the colors. So you can get really wacky looking skin tones if you just crank saturation up. But if you turn the vibrance up, you might notice like his arm here is just subtly getting a little bit more colorful. Same thing with his skin tone here and her skin tone here. You can see there's a layer mask keeping it out of areas where I didn't want it. I didn't want it to affect Kristen's legs. I didn't want it to affect. I didn't want to affect her legs because the jeans didn't need the extra boost. But here it's just giving a little bit of boost to the color for that. And then what I did was I merged all these guys into a copy just so I could make a selection based on that. And I had a lookup table here. And this is just a color lookup table. It's a color grading thing. This is set for normal blending and just 40% opacity. But it gives this sort of like, oh, nice, sort of a cyanic kind of a color grade to it. It was kind of cool. But we wanted to boost it up a little bit more and brighten this up a little bit more, but I didn't want that to affect them. So that was why I merged all the heroes into a copy, load that as a selection and make that a selection mask. And then if you click on this selection mask, you see in my layers, in my properties panel, I slid the opacity of that, the density of that layer mask down to about 50%. So if I turn this all the way up, you see this goes black. If I turn this down to about 50%, this goes shaded gray. If I turn it way down here, it gets even lighter gray. I can also dial in a number. So that was what this is for. It's just kind of keeping this particular lookup table, which is lightening them, except for screen blending. It's lightening them up a bit, but I didn't want them to be so light. So that was keeping some density on them by doing that. And then I also added a split tone curve here. The basic idea was to send the shadows and the highlights slightly different directions. So I didn't want to affect the highlights quite so much, but I wanted to make the shadows look a little more cyan and a little more blue. So this was just go to the red, pull some of the red out of the black point, and then go to the blue and add some blue into the black point. So that's just what this was, just to kind of push that color a little bit. And again, this is all going back and forth with the photographers to get everything decided for what they wanted. And then at the very end, we add a layer of noise. I don't know if you guys can see this. It's probably a little too subtle here for this, but this is basically just a noise layer where I made, if I come here, you'll see what it's doing. This is really way too much noise. But the whole idea is I just want to add some grain into it to make it look a little more organic. Quite often with digitally shot images, photographers who shot film. No, there's an organic look to grain and an organic look to the film. So the idea is you add just a little bit of noise on top to kind of give it a little more of an organic kind of look for that. And that was the final step for this. This is again is just marking where the gutter is. So that's why we have the gap between these two guys. So when it goes in the double page spread, nothing important is in the gutter. That's turned off. And then that was how we completed that one. I want to quickly show you a couple other ones. This again is an older movie poster thing for this, but I want you to see how these go. So this shows you the poster and the logo stuff. This is the art and how this is built. This is our noise layer, but how this is built, you can see how complex this gets to be. And let's drill down a bit and you guys can see what goes on with this. And there's this particular theme about building these things. This started off with a background. Now this background, quite often what happens is when they're working inside the ad agency, somebody comes up with like, ooh, that's kind of a cool background. Let's reuse that one. Let's recycle that one. So the backgrounds will have weird stuff like this in it for that. And like, oh, there's a little hint of sky, whatever like that, but okay. And they might say, hey, Bill, can you pass me that background? So they'll use the same background over and over again or variations on it. And since our guys were coming in here, this little thing back here didn't make a big difference. But if I had to clean up something for this is where I would do retouching. I might use a generative fill to clean that up, to bring that in, but it wasn't necessary for this because these guys were going in there. Now with the guys, you see I have a layer group here and it's named that so I know exactly what these guys are about. Let's turn these things down. And you can see the reasoning behind how all this stuff is built here. So we have Michael Fassbender, who is the young Magneto, and he's got a layer mask for him, and he's a smart object. So if I double click on this, this is the original photograph. You can see it was a 67 megabyte TIFF in all its glory for that. So we've got that. I did the retouching on a separate layer here. The reason why I did it right on here is because if they said, oh, take this out, take that out. Oh, you went too far. You shouldn't have taken that one out. It's all on a separate layer. It's really easy for me to do. Then they wanted to have some sharpening for this. So here's one layer of sharpening. And basically what this is I just merged these two layers into a copy. And then I made it a smart object and I ran the high pass filter on it and I used a blending mode. In this case, I used linear light. If we duplicate this to a new layer, to a new document, and zoom in way close, you see how it's a smart object. It's a merge thing where I did the retouching on it. And this has a high pass filter on it. Come on. And you see it just looks like mostly gray, but we've got the texture and the detail in here for that. So that's what the linear light blending mode is. When you go to blending modes, anything in this group, overlay, soft light, anything in this group is going to use 50% gray as neutral. That means 50% gray will not show up, won't affect your image, but anything lighter than that will lighten your image. Anything darker than that will darken your image according to how much lighter or darker it is. And then these are basically just different strength mixings for this. So overlay and soft light are really common to use. And then linear light is fairly common to use as well. It's a pretty strong move for that. But that's really all that is adding some sharpening for it. And then they wanted a little bit extra sharpening on the top of the hair. So I added that one more time and then had a layer mask that was just for the hair. For me, the hair looked kind of crunchy, but that was what they wanted for it. It's like, okay, fine. I do it the way you want. And then we have some color adjustments coming in here. So there's a black and white layer adjustment set for hard light blending and 61% opacity. These are moves that the designer at the agency made. These are ones I made. So I brightened up his eyes and brightened him up a little bit more. And then he had made this move for adding some contrast, brightening him up, but it's painted out of parts of his face. And then this is adding more contrast in to make him look really kind of crunchy. They wanted that kind of a crunchy look for it. Then we have some atmosphere added in between him and Magneto and a little bit of smoke. Now the smoke here is, if you look here, it's smoke on black for that, and it's set for screen blending. Screen blending is in this lighten mode here, and so it's going to lighten your image. Screen means anything anything that is black is going to be invisible. Anything that is white is going to be show up a lot, and there's going to be shades of opacity in between. So 50% gray will show up 50%. So it's a really cool way of adding smoke and fog and different things like that if you photographed it against black. But you have to make sure it's set against black. So that's one thing that I'll always do is I'll typically clip a curve adjustment layer here to make sure the black is black. But in this case, it really was black and showed up fine. And then we have, I want to scroll down here. We have some more atmosphere adding in between, a little bit more atmosphere. And then we have all Magneto. And we have the retouching. Lines below the eyes. With Ian McClellan, it was a big question of how much to retouch these out. So what I did was I retouched the lines out all the way. And then I slowed the opacity down to like 50%. I could slide it up or down, just depending on what the client wanted. And once the client said, okay, that looks about right, that looks like about the right amount of lightening, we're good to move on. I did the same sharpening move for him. And then I did my divide and conquer color adjustment on him. They had some paint that they had done to lighten things up. So this is white paint on overlay. This again is paint on overlay blending. So they wanted his eyeballs to really lighten up and be bright. And then there's some more atmosphere on top of Fassbinder's face. So that is the guys. And then we have more atmosphere coming in. And so it's just adding in these layers of atmosphere. All these ones make like layer 470, whatever. These are ones that the designer did. And when I looked at them and checked them out, it was paint, which is really hard to match. And I didn't need to redo it because it was just fine. So I let that go. But what I do now is I will go back and rename these. So like I'll call it glow on side or fog on side or something like that. And then there's the color grading layers. And these are ones, again, set up by the agency. But you can see this one here is burnt orange kind of color. And it's set for overlay blending at 40%. And then a masking layer to keep it from affecting Fassbinder too much. But they really wanted Ian McClellan's face to get really orange. And they love the way that goes. So this is their first color grading thing. And then we have a color adjust layer. So these again are things that they set up. And I was like, this is the look we want. Don't mess with their look. It's like, okay, we stick with their look. This is, I don't see it making a big difference. So it must have been something really pretty minor. But you can see it's just building up these layers effect at a time. This is providing some really kind of cool sky effects. There's a rough layer mask here produced to kind of finesse that out. So it's basically just this swirly sky that they came up with added on top. And then we have our noise added to it. And then this is the X-Men and that, just so they could imagine where that goes. But this stuff gets added at the end in the production department when they're setting up to send out the final ad for that. I see we're almost 2 hours in. I'm going to show you, I've teased you about the color correction. So I'm going to show you my divide and conquer color thing, and then we'll get into the questions for that, because I've teased you about this enough. We'll get into this. So I want to show you the divide and conquer idea. So one of the things that I was trying to figure out was an easy way, a way of making working with curve adjustment layers easier, or basically any kind of color correction easier for that. I love curves. It's a very powerful tool. A lot of people have a little bit of trouble with it. It seems kind of complex for it. So I was looking for a way to make that simpler. I was also looking for a way to make color correction easier just in general. And I was reading a book. This was mid 2000s. I was reading a book by Daniel Margulis. Dan Margulis is a longtime legendary color correction expert. In the 80s and 90s, he wrote countless number of magazine articles and many books all the way into the 2000s. He wrote many books about color correction for that, so he's quite a expert for it. And this one book he wrote was about using the LAB color space. He called it the Canyon Conundrum. And the LAB color space, instead of red, green, blue, or cyan, magenta, yellow, black, it works off lightness, and then the color is divided into A and B. A is green, magenta, and B is blue, yellow. I always remember it because B for blue. But the green, magenta, and the blue, yellow as contrasting colors are working off the model's way our eyes work. We have rods and cones. Rods are sensitive to light, so that's the lightness, light, dark. And then we have cones, which are sensitive to color. And the cones in our eyes work off of opposing pairs. So we have one opposing pair that's sensitive for green and magenta color. And then we have another opposing pair that's sensitive for blue and yellow. And out of the difference between blue and yellow and green, magenta is all the colors that we see in the rainbow spectrum we have. Now, that's why I hear some animals have another pair of, another set of cones that give them even brighter, even more color range of seeing. But humans have this method set up for that. So the LAB color space is based on that. And Dan was showing how in the LAB color space, if you bring up a curve adjustment layer, you have a lightness channel, an A channel, which is green magenta, and a B channel, which is blue yellow. So if you want to make something less green, you just go to the B channel, the A channel, and you take some green out. Easy enough. Lightness and the other color aren't affected at all. It's just one color affected, and it's not making your image lighter or darker or chasing around like that. So it's a really powerful tool. If you want to make your image darker, you just go to the lightness channel and make it darker, and it doesn't shift the color around at all, which is really powerful. So if I bring up a curve adjustment layer, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to bring up a curve adjustment layer. I'm going to show you the problem we have is in the RGB or CMYK color space. If I go to my master curve, which is the RGB curve, I make this darker. It gets darker, but it gets more saturated and more red. I'm like, well, that's not good. I just wanted to make it darker. So now I'm going to have to come over here to red. I'm going to have to take some red out. Well, now it's getting too dark. So I have to come over here and I have to make it less dark. Now it's too red and I have to go. So I have to run around in circles like this, which is kind of a problem for that. If I make my image lighter, not only does it get lighter, but it gets the highlights start to shift towards a saturated yellow. And that's not a look I wanted at all either. I just want to make the image darker. That was where reading Dan's book, like, wait a minute. If I'm working on a movie poster or a complex composite, I need the flexibility of being able to adjust everything in context, in the scene. So I can't just shift that one object over to the LAB color space and do a color correction on it and bring it back over. I could, but I'm running around in circles a lot, and it's difficult to make the adjustment in context for that. So I want to be able to make that adjustment where I'm seeing it right in the context. So how would I do that? And then I hit on this idea of setting up two curve adjustment layers, one set for color blending and one set for luminosity blending. And the color blending is only going to affect the color. The red, green, the saturation is just only going to affect the color of it, and it won't make the image darker or lighter at all. If I come here to luminosity, it will only make the image darker or lighter. So if I pull this down, you see it's just getting darker, it's not getting more saturated. If I open this up, it's getting lighter, it's not getting more yellow. So that's a really cool thing for this. So I've got this, and I can make the image less red. I can come over here. I love this targeted sample tool. I come over here and I can pull some red out of her, and she starts to look a little more natural, like that. Like, oh, pretty cool, easy move. I've got her looking really pretty decent with just one little move here, and I didn't make her lighter or darker. I like the density of her, but I didn't want to make her lighter or darker, so that was really pretty cool. So that was a really simple kind of move for that. Then as I started playing with this, I thought, well, what else can I do? If I come over here to the RGB curve, what can I do with this RGB curve? And I took the white point and I pulled it down. Like, hey, look, the white point desaturates. It takes color out because I'm removing color from the image with the curve tool. This is pretty cool. This is the same thing as hue saturation layer, sliding your saturation down. It's the exact same look for this, but now I'm doing it in a curve layer, which is really pretty cool because I could come over here, I could do this, and then I could add some red back in or whatever I wanted to do, or take red out. If I want to give a cool desaturated color grade, I got a lot of things I could do with that. So that's a really pretty powerful move. So I can take saturation out. Can I add saturation? How would I add saturation? Well, if I pull this up, that's kind of not working like I wanted to. Like, okay, that's not it. If I pull this up, no, some parts are getting saturated, some parts are getting desaturated. Pull this down, other parts are getting desaturated. Look at this. The shadows are getting desaturated. If I pull this down, over here, the highlights getting more saturated. That's kind of an interesting thing. Not the look I want, but it's kind of interesting to know. What if I do what we call an S curve, add contrast? Well, look at this. This is adding saturation overall. So I can control this. So I could pin this here. I could pull some saturation just out of the shadows and get an interesting kind of look. This, here we go. Here's the way we want to go. This will pull saturation out of the shadows. And we get kind of an interesting look out of this. And this is something that I cannot do with hue saturation. It's really difficult with hue saturation to affect the shadows or the highlights separately. Conversely, I can come over here and I can see I'm pulling saturation out of just the highlights. See, this is also a pretty cool look. It gives me a little bit more natural look over here. And it's just a subtle little move for that. Pretty easy. So the good news is this is all done by, you can see the results. You don't have to know the formula for it. You just play around and you start figuring that out. So that was how I figured out what was going on with this for that as a tool. And that's what the divide and conquer technique is all about.